Lucas Prescott stood in the back office of his company's 8th store, staring at the latest pile of customer complaints. His family had built this business from the ground up, but ever since he inherited it, keeping track of everything across multiple locations had become a nightmare. The numbers were steady, but something felt off. Employees were quitting at an alarming rate, and customer satisfaction had taken a hit. His district manager, Carl, had reassured him that everything was fine, but Lucas wasn't buying it. He'd heard whispers from employees about unfair treatment and mismanagement. He couldn't ignore it any longer, so he made a decision. Disguising himself as a new hire, he'd go undercover at one of the locations, the one with the highest turnover rate. He needed to see for himself what was really happening inside his stores. Lucas shaved his beard, dyed his dark brown hair a lighter shade, and put on a pair of thick, rimmed glasses. Instead of his usual tailored suits, he grabbed a simple polo and jeans. No one at this location had ever met him in person. It was a corporate chain, and most employees only knew him as a name on company emails. To them, he was just another new guy trying to make ends meet. The moment he walked through the front doors of the store, the energy hit him like a brick wall. Employees moved quickly, but there was tension in the air. A few workers exchanged glances, muttering under their breath about being short-staffed. Lucas approached the front counter, where a young woman with tired eyes and a forced smile greeted him. "You must be the new hire," she said. "I'm Rachel Novick. Welcome to the madness." Lucas nodded. "Yeah, first day, I guess I'll be training," Rachel sighed. "That's what's supposed to happen, but don't hold your breath. Manager's been dumping extra work on us all week." Before Lucas could respond, a voice cut through the air. "New guy, over here." A man in his mid-40s stomped toward them. His name tag read Rodney, and the second Lucas saw him, he knew this was going to be a problem. Rodney barely looked at Lucas before thrusting a clipboard into his hands. "Listen up, rookie. We're short-staffed, so you're gonna have to pick up the slack." Lucas frowned. "I haven't been trained yet," Rodney scoffed. "Training, please. It's not rocket science. Stock the shelves, clean up the aisles, and if a customer has a problem, don't bother me with it." "Got it," Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "Rodney, shouldn't someone show him the ropes first?" Rodney shot her a glare. "You got something better to do, Rachel." Rachel shut her mouth, clearly used to this kind of treatment. Lucas clenched his jaw but nodded. "Got it," Rodney smirked, already turning away. "Good, and don't even think about slacking. I don't tolerate lazy workers." Lucas was about to respond when something else caught his attention. A teenage employee was struggling with a heavy box near the stockroom. He couldn't have been older than 17. "Hey," Lucas said, stepping in. "Need a hand?" The kid, whose name tag read Kevin, looked exhausted but grateful. "Yeah, thanks. These shipments are brutal." Lucas grabbed the other side of the box and helped him carry it in. "You guys always this short on help?" Kevin let out a bitter laugh. "Always. People quit every week. Rodney's been running this place into the ground, but corporate doesn't care." Lucas narrowed his eyes. Oh, he cared, more than Rodney would ever realize. As the day went on, Lucas saw everything he needed to. Rodney barely did any work, instead barking orders at employees while he sat in the office. The workers were overworked and underappreciated. Customers were ignored or treated like an inconvenience. Then came the moment that sealed everything. Lucas was stocking a shelf when Rodney stormed over. "New guy, change of plans." He shoved a cleaning rag into Lucas's hands. "Rachel was supposed to clean the bathrooms, but she's busy, you do it." Lucas turned his head slightly. Rachel was at the register, handling a long line of customers by herself. "Isn't that something the janitor handles?" Lucas asked. Rodney snorted. "The janitor quit last week." "Somebody's gotta do it, and it ain't gonna be me." Lucas opened his mouth to argue, but then Rodney clapped him on the shoulder. "Welcome to the team, rookie." Lucas stood there, gripping the rag as Rodney walked away. He had seen enough. Tomorrow, Rodney would find out exactly who he had been ordering around. Lucas took a slow breath, forcing himself to maintain his cover. The urge to snap at Rodney was strong, but he wasn't done observing. He needed to see just how deep the problems ran. Gripping the rag Rodney had tossed at him, he made his way toward the back of the store. The employee restroom was in rough shape, grimy sinks, floors that hadn't been properly mopped in ages, and a stench that made him grimace. It was clear that despite Rodney's attitude, cleaning had been neglected for far too long. As he worked, voices drifted in from the hallway. Rachel and another employee, a stock associate named Miguel, were talking in hushed tones. Miguel sounded frustrated. He mentioned how his hours kept getting cut at the last minute, yet every shift he was expected to do twice the workload. Rachel confided that she was actively looking for another job. She loved working with customers, but the stress of covering for missing employees while Rodney sat in the office had worn her down. Lucas listened carefully, committing every word to memory. When he finished cleaning, he returned to the sales floor. Kevin was struggling with another load of boxes, his movements sluggish. Lucas stepped in to help again, stacking inventory onto the shelves while keeping an eye on the customers moving through the aisles. A woman at the front was trying to get Rodney's attention. She had a return issue, but Rodney barely glanced up from his phone. He waved her off, muttering that it wasn't his problem and she needed to wait for Rachel. The woman huffed in frustration but had no choice but to stand there. Lucas's jaw tightened. Rachel was already swamped at the register. The line was growing, and customers were shifting impatiently. A young mother with 2 restless children was near the front, juggling a basket full of items while trying to calm her toddler. Lucas moved toward the register, ready to step in and help, but before he could, Rodney finally got up from his chair. Not to assist, just to bark orders. He pointed at Rachel, scolding her for the long line. She was clearly doing her best, but that didn't seem to matter. Lucas watched her expression carefully. She didn't argue, but her grip tightened on the scanner. Her exhaustion was evident. Rodney then turned to Kevin, who had just finished stocking a shelf, and snapped that he wasn't moving fast enough. The teenager mumbled an apology, but it was clear the constant criticism was wearing him down. Lucas felt his patience slipping. Then Rodney did something that made his decision for him. A frail elderly man walked in, moving slowly with a cane. He asked for help finding a specific item. Rodney glanced at him, sighed loudly, and told him to figure it out before walking away. Lucas's hands clenched. That was it. He wasn't waiting until tomorrow. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped forward, his voice sharp and steady. Rodney barely looked at him. Lucas pulled off his glasses, his usual sharp gaze returning. Silence fell over the store as realization dawned on the employees. Rachel's eyes widened. Kevin froze in place. Miguel, who had just walked out from the back, looked like he'd seen a ghost. Rodney blinked, confused. Lucas let the weight of the moment settle before speaking. He stated his full name and title with cold precision. Rodney's face drained of color. The employees exchanged stunned glances. Lucas's tone remained even, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. Rodney stammered, trying to backpedal. Lucas didn't let him. He listed every failure he had witnessed: the neglect, the mistreatment of employees, the outright dismissal of customers. Rodney started to protest, but Lucas shut him down. He turned to the employees, addressing them directly. He acknowledged their hard work, their dedication despite the conditions they were forced to endure. Rachel looked like she was holding back tears. Kevin let out a breath of relief. Miguel's shoulders eased as if a weight had been lifted. Lucas turned back to Rodney. He made it clear Rodney was done, effective immediately. The man spluttered, but he knew there was no way out. Lucas didn't look away as Rodney grabbed his things and left. When the door shut behind him, silence hung in the air. Then Rachel exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. Kevin muttered that he never thought he'd see the day. Lucas met their gazes. Change was coming. And this was just the beginning. The tension in the store was still thick as Rodney slammed the door behind him. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Employees exchanged glances, processing what had just happened. Lucas let the silence linger before turning to face them. His expression was composed, but there was no mistaking the steel in his voice. He wasn't just here to fire a bad manager, he was here to fix what had been broken. Kevin shifted his weight, unsure of what to say. Rachel, still behind the register, exhaled slowly as if releasing months of pent-up frustration. Miguel rubbed the back of his neck, clearly caught between relief and uncertainty. Lucas addressed them directly, making it clear that things would change immediately. He wasn't going to stand by while they were overworked and undervalued. The way they had been treated under Rodney's management was unacceptable, and he intended to make things right. Rachel finally broke the silence, asking what was going to happen next. Lucas assured them that a new store manager would be appointed, one who actually respected their contributions. But for now, they needed to focus on keeping things running while he assessed the full extent of the damage Rodney had caused. He moved behind the counter and took over the register, directing Rachel to take a break. She hesitated, clearly unused to being given a moment to breathe, but when Lucas insisted, she finally relented, stepping aside. As he rang up the next customer, he paid close attention to how the store functioned. Inventory was disorganized. The layout made it difficult for customers to navigate efficiently, and employees were stretched too thin to provide the level of service they should have been able to. It was clear that Rodney had been coasting, doing as little as possible while dumping the workload onto his team. Kevin approached hesitantly, asking if Lucas really intended to stay and help. Lucas nodded, making it clear that he wasn't leaving until the store was back on track. Kevin seemed skeptical at first, but as Lucas continued handling transactions with ease, his expression shifted to something closer to cautious optimism. Miguel joined in, voicing his frustrations about how schedules had been manipulated to cut costs at the expense of the employees. Lucas listened carefully, taking mental notes. He promised that pay, hours, and workload distribution would be reviewed immediately. No more last-minute cuts or unreasonable expectations. As the day continued, Lucas worked alongside them, rotating between tasks to get a first-hand look at the store's operations. He assisted customers, reorganized stock, and even took a turn handling returns, something Rodney had blatantly avoided. A customer who had been ignored earlier returned, clearly expecting the same dismissive treatment. But instead of being brushed off, she was met with attentiveness and actual problem-solving. The change in her demeanor was immediate relief, replacing frustration. Rachel, watching from a distance, shook her head in disbelief. She admitted that it had been a long time since anyone in management had actually cared. Lucas didn't respond right away. He was thinking about how easy it had been for things to fall apart without him noticing. By the time the store closed for the night, the atmosphere had shifted. There was still exhaustion in the air. These employees had been through a lot, but now, there was something else. A sense that maybe, just maybe, things were finally going to get better. Lucas locked up the store and turned to the employees who remained. They looked at him, waiting. He assured them that this wasn't a temporary fix. He would be making permanent changes, and he would be checking in regularly to ensure that those changes were upheld. Rachel, Kevin, and Miguel exchanged glances, and for the first time that day, there was a spark of hope in their expressions. Lucas knew there was still a lot of work to be done, but at least now they were moving in the right direction. The following morning, Lucas arrived at the store early. He had spent the night reviewing employee records, scheduling policies, and customer feedback. Everything confirmed what he had already seen firsthand. Mismanagement had been bleeding this location dry. If he wanted to turn things around, he had to act fast. The store was quiet when he stepped inside, the faint hum of overhead lights the only sound. Rachel was already there, organizing the front counter. She glanced up, surprise flickering across her face before she nodded in acknowledgement. Miguel arrived a few minutes later, rubbing his hands together against the morning chill. Kevin followed soon after, looking more alert than he had the previous day. Lucas called them together before the store opened. He wasn't interested in giving empty speeches. They needed to know exactly what was happening next. He started by outlining immediate changes. First, a temporary manager would be brought in while he personally oversaw the hiring of a permanent one. Second, employee schedules would be adjusted to ensure fair workload distribution. No more last-minute cuts or forcing people to work beyond their limits. Rachel asked if that meant they would finally have enough staff to handle peak hours. Lucas assured her that hiring was already in progress. Miguel raised a concern about training. Too many employees had been thrown into their roles without proper guidance, leading to mistakes and frustration. Lucas agreed. Training protocols would be reinstated, and experienced staff would be given the opportunity to take on leadership roles with additional pay. Kevin hesitated before speaking, his voice quieter than the others. He wanted to know if this was just temporary, if things would go back to how they were once corporate attention shifted elsewhere. Lucas met his gaze and made it clear. This store and every other location under his company's banner would be held to a higher standard moving forward. He wasn't here for a quick fix. He was here to rebuild trust, starting with them. As the store opened for business, Lucas positioned himself near the front, watching how the morning unfolded. Customers trickled in steadily, and for the first time since he had arrived, employees moved with a sense of purpose rather than exhaustion. Rachel handled the register with efficiency, no longer overwhelmed by an unmanageable line. Miguel focused on stocking shelves, ensuring that aisles remained organized. Kevin assisted customers without the usual hesitance, knowing he had the support he needed. A middle-aged man approached the counter, scanning the store with a critical eye. Lucas recognized him immediately. Robert, the regional director. Lucas had called him the night before, instructing him to visit in person. Robert greeted Lucas with a firm handshake before stepping back to observe. It didn't take long for him to notice the changes. The two of them walked the floor together, discussing long-term improvements. Lucas pointed out areas that had been neglected under the previous management: inventory gaps, customer service weaknesses, and employee morale. Robert listened carefully, taking notes. At one point, Rachel approached cautiously, unsure if she was allowed to interrupt. Lucas gestured for her to speak freely. She mentioned that customers had started noticing the difference. A few regulars had already commented that the store felt more welcoming. Lucas nodded, encouraging her to continue gathering feedback. By midday, Lucas was confident they were on the right track. There was still work to be done, but the foundation was being laid. As the afternoon rush began, Lucas stepped back, allowing employees to take full control of their roles. They moved with renewed confidence, no longer carrying the weight of poor leadership. Kevin caught his eye from across the store. There was a quiet determination in his expression, a glimpse of what could be if employees were given the support they deserved. Lucas knew this wasn't just about fixing one store. It was about setting a precedent, a reminder that every person in the company mattered. As he prepared to leave, Rachel stopped him. There was no hesitation this time, only gratitude. Lucas didn't need thanks. The real victory was seeing them believe in their workplace again. He stepped outside, taking in the crisp air. One store down, many more to go. Lucas left the store that evening knowing that progress had been made, but the real challenge was sustaining it. One good day wasn't enough, and he had no intention of letting things slip back into chaos. The next morning, he arrived unannounced. He didn't want employees to think they needed to put on a show just because he was there. The true measure of change would be how the store functioned when no one expected him to be watching. Inside, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Employees moved with a sense of purpose, not just scrambling to keep up. The store looked cleaner, better organized. Rachel was training a new hire at the front register, explaining company policies in a way that was both thorough and approachable. Kevin was assisting a customer in one of the aisles, listening carefully before offering a solution. Miguel was in the back, reviewing shipment logs, making sure they weren't falling behind on inventory like before. Lucas walked through the aisles, quietly observing. The tension that had been present just days ago was fading, replaced by something steadier. Employees weren't rushing to avoid conflict or working out of fear. They were starting to trust that they wouldn't be left to struggle alone. Robert had followed up on their conversation from the previous day. A new temporary manager had been assigned an experienced leader from another location who had a reputation for fairness and efficiency. She was already in the back office, setting up schedules and reviewing store policies to make sure they aligned with proper company standards. Lucas approached her, introducing himself formally now that his cover was long gone. She was sharp, direct, and wasted no time getting to the point. She had already identified areas that needed improvement: supply chain inconsistencies, outdated training materials, and gaps in employee coverage. She handed Lucas a list of recommendations, and as he scanned them, he realized she had pinpointed several issues he had missed. That was exactly the kind of leadership this store needed, someone who wouldn't just maintain the status quo but actively work to improve things. While they spoke, an employee stepped into the office, hesitant but determined. It was Miguel. He had never been the type to speak up before, but now he had something on his mind. He explained that while conditions had improved, there were still underlying frustrations. Employees were adjusting, but some were very worried that this was temporary, that after a few weeks, things would return to the way they had always been. Lucas understood. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. It had to be earned through consistent action. He assured Miguel that changes weren't just surface-level fixes. New training programs were being implemented across multiple locations, and oversight would be stronger moving forward. Employees would be encouraged to voice concerns before they became major problems. Miguel listened carefully, then nodded. There was still a hint of skepticism in his expression, but he seemed willing to give it a chance. Leaving the office, Lucas walked the store floor again, this time taking a different approach. Rather than just observing, he engaged directly. He asked employees what they needed to do their jobs better. He listened. Some requests were small, better organization in the stockroom, more streamlined communication between shifts. Others were larger, clearer paths for advancement, better recognition for employees who consistently went above and beyond. Lucas took note of everything, not just for this location but for the company as a whole. Later that afternoon, a corporate representative arrived. They had been sent in response to Lucas's internal audit of the store's operations. Normally, these visits were routine, often little more than a formality. But this time, Lucas made sure it was different. He led the representative through the store, detailing the problems that had been uncovered and the steps already being taken to correct them. He didn't sugarcoat anything. This wasn't about presenting a polished image, it was about ensuring lasting improvements. The representative was taken aback by his directness, but quickly saw the value in it. They agreed to push for broader policy changes, reinforcing the idea that employees needed better support across all locations. As the day wound down, Lucas took a step back, watching everything in motion. The store wasn't perfect yet, but the foundation was being rebuilt. Employees were adjusting, customers were already noticing the difference, and leadership was finally stepping up where it had previously failed. Before leaving, Lucas had one last conversation with Kevin. The teenager had been quiet throughout the day, focusing on his work, but Lucas could tell something was on his mind. When asked directly, Kevin admitted that he had nearly quit before all of this happened. He had been tired of feeling invisible, of being treated as disposable. Lucas didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, he told Kevin the truth: employees like him were the backbone of the company, and if leadership ever failed to recognize that again, it was his job to make sure they were held accountable. Kevin nodded slowly, seeming to process the weight of those words. Lucas left the store that evening knowing the work wasn't finished. But for the first time in a long time, he was confident that real change was happening not just in one location, but across the entire company.